A white cop stops a black woman in a hoodie. No badge, no threats. But when she pulls out her ID, everything shatters. She's not just anyone. She's his boss. And the world just saw everything. One stare, one live stream. The whole system's about to get audited. The glass door of Delgrove Mart gave a soft clink as Jordan Ray Ellison pushed it open. The rubbery scent of the welcome mat mixed with a faint, stale peppermint drifting from the ceiling-mounted air freshener. It was nearly 9 p.m. on the outskirts of Montera, and the town felt like it tucked itself away beneath a thin veil of mist. Ray wore a navy hoodie, zipped halfway up, black jeans, worn sneakers. No badge, no uniform, no reason to stand out. All she needed was a cold bottle of water and a protein bar to hold her over until she got home. Training had run long today, and she didn't have the energy for small talk. There were only 3 others in the store, an elderly man behind the checkout counter, tapping his fingers in rhythm with a quiet country tune playing from a corner speaker, a middle-aged man inspecting a bag of chips near the back shelf, and a police officer in uniform leaning against a vending machine near the exit, holding an unopened soda can. Officer Troy Delaney Whitmore, 42, tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes that scanned every movement in the room. Ray walked past him, her gaze unwavering. "Hold up." The voice came from behind her, not a request, a command. She stopped, turned, her dark eyes locked with Whitmore's challenging stare. "Something I can help you with, officer?" she asked, her voice even and smooth as still water. He pushed off the vending machine, took a step forward, hand resting lightly on his belt where a radio and a pair of handcuffs hung. "What brings you here?" Ray tilted her head slightly. "Buying something. Same as the guy behind you and the gentleman at the counter." "You sure about that?" His voice sharpened. "I've seen your type before. Pretend to shop, wait for the right moment." The man by the snacks looked up, then quickly looked away. The old man behind the counter fell silent, his hand trembling slightly as he switched to polishing a glass with a silk cloth. Ray didn't respond right away. She inhaled deeply, then the cold air from the AC brushed the back of her neck. She was used to this kind of look. She had trained dozens of rookies on how to control unconscious bias. But there was no manual for when you became the target. "Maybe you should ask who I am," she said gently, but every word landed with the weight of iron. Whitmore scoffed. "Don't need to. I know your kind." Then he keyed his radio, reciting as if from a memorized script. "Dispatch, checking on a suspicious subject at Delgrove Mart. Female, dark hoodie, non-compliant." Ray remained still, silent. She stared at him for a long moment. Her eyes held no rage, no fear, just silence. A silence so thick it seemed to freeze the air around them. "You sure?" she asked, lifting her chin slightly. "You really want to go through with that choice?" The question wasn't meant to persuade. It was simply a final chance for a man who didn't yet realize who he'd just confronted. But Whitmore didn't see it. He saw only a black woman in casual clothes. And to him, that was already suspicious. Inside a quiet small-town convenience store, an avalanche had begun. Not loud, not violent, but it would bury far more than just a bruised ego. The chime of Delgrove Mart's front door rang out again. A chill evening breeze swept in, carrying the scent of dry grass and damp asphalt. Sergeant Naomi Bannister stepped inside, her heavy boots tapping sharply on the tile floor. She was on her way back to headquarters after a long shift when she noticed a patrol car parked crookedly at the curb and heard a familiar voice on the radio. Troy Delaney Whitmore. Naomi's eyes scanned the store quickly. She recognized Jordan Ray Ellison almost immediately. No one in the S-Tier-D district didn't know Commander Ellison, the woman who led the 4-person raid that dismantled a human trafficking ring, the one who orchestrated a hostage rescue at Empire National Bank without a single casualty. And now, here she was being treated like a suspect by her own subordinate? Whitmore turned when he saw Naomi enter. "Bannister, good timing," he said, hand still on his radio. "I'm handling a suspicious individual." "Excuse me?" Naomi narrowed her eyes, voice tight. "You're handling who exactly, Whitmore?" Ray said nothing. She stood still, arms folded across her chest, her eyes calm and dark, watching. Naomi stepped closer, getting a clearer look at the woman being detained. She froze mid-step. Her heart skipped. That face, there was no mistaking it. Whitmore. Naomi turned sharply toward him, her voice suddenly low and cold. You radioed in a report on that woman? Yes, I saw her acting sketchy. That's Commander Jordan Ray Ellison, you idiot. Naomi snapped, abandoning her usual composure. Your direct superior, head of the entire state tactical unit we've been coordinating with. Whitmore froze. His mouth opened, but no words came out. His eyes darted between Naomi and Jordan, like his brain was struggling to connect two puzzle pieces that just didn't fit. And just as the room thickened with shock and disbelief, a male voice piped up from behind the snack aisle. I've been live streaming this. Ray and Naomi turned in unison. Eduardo Ramos, the man who'd seemed so interested in potato chips, was now holding up his phone, camera pointed squarely at the unfolding scene. The number on screen ticked rapidly upward. 1,247 viewers watching live. What the hell are you doing? Whitmore barked. Eduardo shrugged. Just a citizen documenting how police treat people of color. Oh, and y'all heard that, right? He leaned into the mic. Commander of the SWAT unit, stopped by a white cop for wearing a hoodie and having black skin in her own damn town. Whitmore's face turned crimson. Naomi stepped forward and snatched the radio from his hand. I'll be documenting this entire incident in the official report. And you best stay silent until legal counsel arrives. Ray still didn't speak. She walked over to Eduardo, eyes flicking to his screen. A comment scrolled across. This happened to me last week. Then another, all too familiar. But this time they picked the wrong one. She turned back to Whitmore, her voice low and cool. This isn't the first time, but it might be the last. Outside, more patrol cars pulled up. Red and blue lights flickered across the glass. But everything, every second, had already streamed straight into the eyes of over 1,000 people. And the story was just beginning. Delgrove Mart fell into an eerie silence after Naomi called out Troy Whitmore in front of a live stream audience. Outside, patrol lights continued to dance across the store windows, but inside, the tension had shifted. Jordan Ray Ellison still stood there. No raised voice, no flared nostrils, no demand for apology. She calmly slipped a hand into the pocket of her dark gray hoodie, pulled out a small leather wallet, and placed it gently on the counter, under fluorescence in dozens of eyes. Her badge gleamed like a blade slicing through denial. Jordan Ray Ellison, Commander, STRD, State Tactical Response Division. There was no sudden movement, no threat issued, only a single sentence, and it left the whole room breathless. If you'd asked instead of assumed, you wouldn't be in this position. Whitmore stood frozen. His so-called control of the situation had long slipped from his grasp. Now, every pair of eyes, Naomi's, Eduardo's still live-streaming phone, even the ceiling security camera, was fixed on him like a courtroom spotlight before sentencing. Behind the counter, the elderly clerk Lloyd Hargan clutched at his uniform sleeve. He'd been standing there the entire time, listening, watching, knowing, but he had said nothing. Lloyd's shoulders trembled slightly. The man, well into his 60s, bowed his head, eyes fixed on the speckled floor beneath flickering lights. He inhaled deeply, then spoke in a voice thick with guilt. I'm sorry, Ms. Ellison. I should have spoken up sooner. Jordan didn't turn, but she gave a slow nod, not a gesture of forgiveness, but of acknowledgement. Eduardo, still holding the phone, murmured under his breath, just loud enough for everyone to hear. This needs to be played at every police academy in the country. The door swung open again. Another officer entered, quickly approaching Naomi for a statement. Meanwhile, Whitmore remained rooted, pale as drywall, lips pressed into a tight, bloodless line. Naomi kept it brief. You should wait in the car until further notice. And don't touch the radio again. For the first time that night, Whitmore didn't argue. He turned and walked out, boots thudding on tile with the weight of shame. The glass door swung shut behind him, and the silence inside broke with a collective, exhale breath. Jordan retrieved her badge and tucked it back into her hoodie pocket. Then she turned to Lloyd. "Still got the strawberry protein bar? I could use the energy." Lloyd nodded, suddenly more nimble than he had seemed all evening. He reached for the item and handed it over. When she pulled out some cash, he hesitated. "No charge. It's on the house." Ray smiled, not for the free snack, but for the quiet dignity of a man who had finally chosen to do the right thing. Not heroic, but right. Then she stepped toward the door, water bottle in hand, energy bar in her hoodie pocket. No announcement needed, because tonight, the system had spoken for her. Just as a glass door Delgrove Mart swung shut behind Jordan Ray Ellison, the deep, steady rumble of a black SUV engine echoed from the parking lot out front. The car door opened, not hurriedly, but with finality. Heavy military boots struck the pavement in a controlled rhythm, followed by a tall figure clad in a commander's uniform with silver trim at the cuffs. The man was Commander Alton Worthing, 52 years old, over 6 feet tall, dark-skinned, with closely cropped silver at his temples and eyes, as seasoned cold as forged steel. He didn't need to introduce himself. His presence alone was enough to silence an entire precinct the moment he entered. Naomi Bannister was the first to meet him. She nodded crisply. "Commander, he's in the car." Worthing didn't respond. He strode directly to Patrol Unit 214, where Troy Delaney Whitmore sat slouched behind the wheel, hands gripping it like the last thread of a vanishing authority. The car window rolled down as Worthing tapped on the glass. He stared at Whitmore like a surgeon examining a failed graft under magnification. "Step out, officer." Whitmore fumbled with the door, stood awkwardly, eyes avoiding Worthing's gaze. "Badge," Worthing said, palm out. Whitmore hesitated. Worthing repeated, firmer this time. "Badge. And your sidearm." With no other option, Whitmore removed his badge, then slowly unholstered his Glock 17. He handed both over to Worthing in deliberate movements, like dismantling the last remnants of a delusion. "You're suspended. Effective immediately. No press statements. No personal defenses. You will report to the Internal Affairs Review Board tomorrow morning." Whitmore started to speak. "I just thought you looked SUS." Worthing raised a hand to cut him off. His voice cracked through the night like a slab of ice splitting. "Stop. She's a state-level commander. She could have put you on the ground in 2 seconds flat without ever drawing her weapon, but she chose not to, and that is something you will never understand." That moment, no cameras, no live stream, was just a man being forced to face the truth, that a badge doesn't equal integrity. Ray stood a few paces away, never intervening. But when her eyes met Worthing's, he gave a brief nod, not out of hierarchy, but respect. Then an unexpected ripple. Eduardo Ramos's phone buzzed. The screen flashed a notification. Channel temporarily locked due to community standards violation. Ray stepped closer, glanced at the screen, and said quietly, "Send me the original file. We'll go through the official channels." Eduardo nodded, still dazed. A 3-minute video, 120,000 views, deleted in 30 seconds. But Ray was used to that. Real justice didn't always go live, but it could be remembered. Worthing turned to Naomi. "Call Internal Affairs and notify the mayor's office. Let them know this won't be swept under the rug." The night at Delgrove Mart was no longer a misunderstanding. It had become an open indictment, waiting to be written further, either in courage or in avoidance. Less than 8 hours after the live stream ended, a clipped video of Jordan Ray Ellison standing silently as Officer Troy Delaney Whitmore wrongfully confronted her had exploded across social media. Just 37 seconds long, the clip struck a nerve America had tried to dull for decades. The illusion backed by a badge. Hashtags like hashtag Ask Before You Assume and hashtag Ellison Effect flooded Twitter, Facebook, Reddit. Over 3 million views by late afternoon. At Montero Law School, first-year students held an emergency forum titled "Presumed Authority and the Cost of Silence." A young black woman with braided hair stood and said, "Jordan Ray Ellison didn't say a word, and yet she made an entire country listen." The auditorium erupted in applause. In an elementary school in Northern Virginia, a social studies teacher played the clip for her 5th grade class. A boy in the front row, Malik, murmured, "I want to be like her." But the story didn't stop there. 1 week later, in Montero, another incident occurred. A 17-year-old high school student named Kian Parrish was pulled over by a traffic officer for looking suspicious. When the officer demanded to search the car without reason, Kian stood tall, turned on his phone camera, and said, "Clearly, I know my rights. I saw Mrs. Jordan Ray Ellison stand her ground, and I'm going to do the same." He didn't shout. He didn't resist. But his voice carried with such resolve that the officer stepped back and called dispatch. For once, following proper protocol, Kian's video went viral, shared under a new hashtag. Hashtag because of Ellison. At high schools across the southern states, students began organizing reading circles on non-confrontational response, named after the approach Ray had demonstrated. They weren't learning how to shout. They were learning how to hold a steady gaze and maintain calm, wielding a new form of strength. On KLRM's morning radio show in Austin, a well-known host opened the broadcast with a quiet declaration. "This morning, I'm not talking about scandals or the Billboard charts. I want to talk about a woman who made an entire police force look in the mirror." He didn't say Ray's name, but listeners knew. Even those who typically didn't care about politics or justice found themselves pulled into this national conversation because, for the first time, they saw it clearly. A black woman wearing a plain hoodie didn't need rage to dismantle an entire system built on suspicion. At a farmer's market in Phoenix, a baker taped a printed quote to her stall. "If you'd asked instead of assumed, you wouldn't be in this situation." Jordan Ray Ellison had yet to speak publicly since that night, but the country had begun speaking for her. And that was the real reckoning. That night, when Jordan Ray Ellison returned to the STRD headquarters in downtown Montero, the clock read 9:46 p.m. She hadn't driven. She chose to walk the 3 blocks from the light rail station, needing time to breathe, to let the hum of the city soothe the fractures still echoing in her mind. Under the dim, faded neon lights of the entrance lobby, Ray stepped through the automatic glass doors. But as her tactical boots hit the polished concrete floor, she stopped in her tracks. A line of people stood in front of her, silent. 15 members of the state's Strategic Response Tactical Division, her SWAT team, stood at full attention, each one in full black uniform, gloves clipped neatly to their belts, boots shine like mirrors. Their faces were stoic, disciplined, but in their eyes was something Ray wasn't used to seeing. Not protocol respect, but something deeper, something human, reverence. In unison, they raised their hands and saluted. Ray froze. She had once led hostage rescues at the New Mexico border, negotiated with armed extremists in a Wyoming warehouse, and pulled an injured agent to safety under gunfire in Appalachia. But not once in her life, had she seen her team salute her like this. Not because she was a commander, but because she was Ray, the woman who stood unshaken in the face of prejudice, who didn't fight back, who didn't fall. She didn't speak, but her eyes glistened. At the end of the line stood Sergeant Naomi Bannister, still in patrol uniform, clearly just off shift. She gave a subtle nod, as if to say, "We know, and we stand with you." Commander Alton Worthing appeared from the west hallway. In his hands, a small black box containing a new badge, a symbol given only once in a SWAT commander's life. "This is the first time I've handed this over, not because protocol demands it," he said, voice low and rough, "but because the person receiving it kept it, not with power, but with dignity." Ray stepped forward. Her hands trembled slightly as she accepted the box, but her gaze never wavered. She opened it. The gleaming badge rested atop a bed of black velvet, like a silent reminder. The one who keeps it is the one who dare to stand still when questioned, not for anyone else, but for themselves. Behind her, someone clapped, then others joined, softly at first, but enough to send a low tremor through the concrete ceiling above. Ray raised her hand in salute, not out of rank, but because she knew, finally, she was no longer standing alone. The night in Montero remained cold, but her heart was strangely warm. The preliminary hearing for Troy Delaney Whitmore took place on a gray Monday morning in the municipal police boardroom of Montera. No stage lights, no opening statements, just a sealed room, a lone microphone at the center table, and dozens of eyes waiting for answers. Troy wore plain clothes, no badge, no sidearm. He looked straight ahead at the review panel, and for the first time in his life, no one nodded or saluted as he entered. When asked about his actions that day at Delgrove Mart, he answered in a flat tone. I had reasonable suspicion that is standard protocol when dealing with an unclear subject. Sergeant Naomi Bannister sat across from him, her chin resting on lace fingers. She didn't respond right away. She let the room sink into silence for several seconds before gently placing a black folder on the table. 8 years of internal records on your service, she said, sliding the folder toward the chair. 5 complaints of racial bias, each marked as handled internally. No disciplinary records kept, but evidence exists of uncalled witnesses, redacted audio, and 2 complainants relocating out of county within 6 months. Another silence fell across the room. Troy blinked, his hands, resting on his thighs, curled into fists. But Naomi wasn't finished. And here's the new development. She nodded to the back of the room. A technician pressed play on an audio file from a podcast released just 2 days prior. The voice was gravelly, clear, but anonymous. When I served as county sheriff from 2002 to 2011, I watched misconduct reports get buried in desk drawers. One of the names on those reports was Troy Whitmore. I didn't speak up then, and I live with that guilt every day. The system wasn't built to protect justice. It was built to protect internal reputation. Tens of thousands had already heard that episode. Over 400,000 downloads in just 3 days. Social media erupted. A civil rights attorney in Houston wrote, "The system isn't broken. It's working exactly as it was designed, to ignore the voices of people of color." At the conclusion of the hearing, when Troy was invited to offer final remarks, he lifted his head one last time. "I'm not a racist. I was just following instinct." Naomi didn't smile. She simply shook her head and said, "That's the problem. When your instincts are taught by bias, your actions betray the honor of the profession." The hearing ended without a formal ruling, but the public wasn't waiting. An online petition demanding Troy's dismissal had passed 250,000 signatures. Local TV aired the footage 5 times a night, and in the far corner of the gallery, Jordan Ray Ellison watched quietly. She hadn't come to confront. She came to witness something she once believed impossible. A system, slowly, imperfectly, was beginning to listen. 3 days later, Jordan Ray Ellison sat in a closed conference room at STRD headquarters on the outskirts of Montera. The room buzzed with fluorescent light, leather chairs arranged neatly in rows. No cameras, no press, just polished handshakes and eyes eager to sweep it all away. In front of her sat 3 men, a representative from the state police union, their attorney, and a senior inspector from the Office of Internal Coordination. They weren't there to discuss. They were there to propose. "We want to sincerely apologize for the experience you endured, Commander Ellison," the representative began, his tone smooth and practiced like a press release. "We'd like to resolve this professionally and quietly. A joint statement, an honorary stipend, perhaps an internal commendation. And if you'd like, we can arrange a small ceremony." Ray cut in brief but not rude. "I don't need an award for surviving." The room froze. The lawyer leaned forward slightly. "We just believe it would be better for all parties if—" "No," Ray said, locking eyes with him. "If I accept this reconciliation, I betray those without a badge, the ones who will be targeted next, without video, without rank, without anyone to speak for them." She stood. Both hands rested on the table. "I have a counterproposal." The 3 glanced at each other. "Instead of recognition, I want implicit bias response training to be mandatory statewide. Not a one-off. Mandatory. Filmed. Periodically assessed. Documented. I want to see who's progressing, who isn't, and who no longer qualifies to carry a gun." The union rep frowned. "You understand that we'll face heavy pushback." "Absolutely," Ray nodded, her voice firm as steel. "But if you're sitting here asking for my silence, at least understand this. I'm not afraid of pushback. I'm afraid that tomorrow, a child will watch their mother be treated the way I was, and think it's normal. Silence, long unbroken. No one dared to speak. Ray picked up the file in front of her, turned and stopped at the door. She looked back, eyes fixed on the inspector. I didn't come here to be pitted. I came to change something that's been rotting for a long time. Then she walked out. The fluorescent light caught the silver badge on her chest. She knew she had just declined a sweet but hollow compromise, and she also knew her next appearance wouldn't be behind closed doors. It would be at the public oversight hearing, where truth would no longer be allowed to stay buried. Hearing room 3 at the Montero Hall of Justice was no longer a place for polite justifications. This was the extended summons, the second hearing, but the decisive one, after new evidence and sworn testimony had forced the review board to reopen the entire case. Sergeant Naomi Bannister sat at the witness table, her expression firm, as if she'd waited her whole career for this moment. I am resubmitting 5 formal complaints against Officer Troy Delaney Whitmore, along with new evidence showing deliberate disregard by internal oversight. She slid a stack of papers forward. Each report bore scrawled notes in red ink. Handled, no further review necessary. Then a video played, submitted anonymously by an officer to board. In it, Whitmore stood inside the STRD commander's office, laughing with a colleague. Just put reasonable suspicion in the report. Civilians can't tell the difference anyway. The room fell silent. Next, the board called another witness, Linda Garver, 38, a single mother of Puerto Rican descent. Her voice was hoarse. He pulled me over right outside my daughter's school, made me step out of the car because he thought I didn't look like a parent. I filed a complaint. No one ever called back. A board member nodded slowly, eyes tinged red. The final blow came in the form of a sworn statement from a former STRD chief inspector, now retired. He admitted to being instructed to remove 3 complaint records to protect departmental reputation. His final line left the room chilled. It wasn't that the system didn't see. We chose not to look. The presiding chair nodded solemnly and turned to the board. The vote was conducted in closed session. 11 minutes later, the ruling was read aloud. Officer Troy Delaney Whitmore is found to have committed abuse of authority, engaged in systematic racial profiling, and obstructed justice by falsifying internal reports. He is hereby permanently stripped of his badge, barred from serving in any law enforcement agency, and will stand trial in a state-level civil court. At the back of the room, Jordan Ray Ellison said nothing. But when the room rose to its feet, the first applause came not from a leader or an advocate, but from a high school student in row 4. No one had to be told. The whole room stood, not for a slogan, but for a simple truth. Justice had spoken. One late Friday afternoon, as Montero's sunlight spilled like honey across the sidewalk in front of Del Grove Mart, Jordan Ray Ellison returned to where it all began, not to scold, but to close the circle. She wore no hoodie, no tactical vest, just a simple denim shirt and a quiet smile at the corner of her lips. In her hand, a small card, navy blue, with just 7 handwritten words. I respect what you chose to undo. Inside the store, Lloyd Hargan, the aging employee nearing 60, face lined with wear, stood frozen as he saw her walk in. He had changed, not just because of the apology recording he submitted to the system, but because of something deeper. He had voluntarily reinstalled every camera, upgraded the internal monitoring system, and hand-wrote a letter to the police department titled, "Silence Has Consequences." "Thank you," Ray said, placing the card gently on the counter, "for not letting fear decide the rest of your story." Lloyd only nodded, but this time his eyes did not look away. Ray left Del Grove Mart for the second time. But this time, she didn't carry anger. She carried clarity. She once thought that night had been a mistake, a slip in a system already struggling to stand. Not anymore. It was a signal, a single broken link that revealed how corroded the entire chain had become. And because of that, it could never be patched with apologies. It had to be rebuilt from the foundation up. She stepped through the glass door, never looking back. But her voice, in news clips, lectures, town hall forums, still echoed somewhere behind her. On a street lamp just outside, a new poster had been taped up. You don't have to shout to be heard, but you must stand to be seen. Beneath the words, a simple drawing. A black woman standing quietly at a checkout counter, her badge placed firmly in front of her. And then, Ray's final words from her last press briefing rose in her memory, like a truth no one could ever erase. An untrustworthy cop can ruin a case, but a woman who stands up can change an entire system. Not every fight needs a scream. Sometimes, one person standing their ground without stepping back is enough to make an entire system take notice. The story of Jordan Ray Ellison isn't just about a confrontation in a convenience store. It's a reminder that prejudice can show up anywhere, but so can justice, if we meet it with patience and principle. If you believe in stories that awaken conscience and illuminate truth, subscribe to Mr. Seven Stories. Every view, every share is a small but powerful step toward change. We don't tell stories to entertain. We tell them so you can help open the door to what's real.